What happened to Cinderella 3, Blood Bowl?
Movie's not out yet.
Our bits weren't the work print. 3, 2, got it.
Oh, you! Felon! Will!
The slasher film, also known as the stalk and slash or the slice and dice movie, is a staple horror subgenre. And although the subgenre has been widely dismissed and condemned by critics, the slasher film simply refuses to stay dead, just like the slasher icons who keep returning for yet another sequel.
You shouldn't have buried me. I'm not dead.
The slashers developed across several phases, the first being the proto-slasher period from the 60s to the late 70s, then the boom period from the 70s to the 80s, the period of supernatural slashers and sequels from the mid-80s to the 90s, then the postmodern period from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, and then another period from the mid-2000s to the present. And in this talk, I'll mainly be concentrating on the final stage from the mid-2000s to the present. That stage has mainly been understood as an era of remakes, and to be sure, there's a lot of remakes made in the period generally. But more specifically, there have been remakes of classic slasher films in the period, including When a Stranger Calls.
Hello?
Have you checked the children?
My Bloody Valentine. And A Nightmare on Elm Street.
No.
But there's much more to the 2000 slasher film than just remakes. For example, there are continuing sequels to major slasher series such as Scream 4, Child's Play, and Halloween. There are also new icons emerging such as the Orphan Killer, Victor Crowley in the Hatchet series, or Art the Clown of Terrifier. There are throwbacks to previous eras, including slasher films that are partly set in the 80s, such as Die Die Delta Pi. Slashers that evoke the 80s using an 8-bit aesthetic, such as this one in Pool Party Massacre. Or films like Bikini Girls on Ice that use pastiches of rock music from the era. There are even straight revivals of the slasher's glory days, including Trackman, Girl House, and Crazy Lake. And all of these are conventional slasher movies brought up to date mainly by being shot in HD and by including contemporary fashion, technology and slang. Otherwise, they're pretty traditional slasher flicks. However, there is another significant trend within the subgenre, and that's what I call the meta-modern slasher. And to understand what the meta-modern slasher is, we need to quickly return to our history in a little bit more detail. So, following the successes of Halloween in 1978 and Friday the 13th in 1980, there was a boom period in slasher film production. The subgenre really formed in that period, so the formula was repeated and refined, and quite quickly, in only really a couple of years, the market became so saturated that the slasher film almost burnt itself out entirely. In the mid-80s, we then get a mini revival of the slasher, a period of diversification where films like A Nightmare on Elm Street introduced supernatural elements, the stuff of more traditional horror, to the slasher. That was then followed by various other supernatural killers like Chucky from Child's Play.
I don't believe it.
And Candyman.
Be my victim. Be my victim.
As the supernatural slasher phase continued, it became more comedic, and again there it's following A Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy's tendency to crack jokes, which escalated across the 80s until he eventually became an outright comic character. So, slasher films like Slumber Party Massacre 2, Dr. Giggles,
If you think that's bad, wait till you get my bill.
and Funny Man are all really quite silly. That shift set the scene for the so-called postmodern slasher phase, which was known for including intertextual references and self-reflexive in-jokes, as seen in films like Scream,
Scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween.
urban legend,
The idea of an urban legend serial killer, it's a stretch.
The call's coming from inside the house.
Could it be an urban legend?
and Bride of Chucky.
I knew you were obsessed, but
I'm not.
Chucky? He's so 80s.
No,
He's
he's
even
not.
scary.
Yes, he is.
Look at him. You look at that punk. You looking at me?
However, I suggest that what really differentiates these films from their predecessors is their snarky, cynical tone. And that tone is seen in these films in various ways. One is the callous attitudes expressed by teens when their peers die.
Naturally, you're all horrified by the sudden and senseless loss of your classmates. Hey, come on, guys. Maybe we'll all feel better if we talk about our lost classmates and how we feel. Mark, you were friends with Rod. You want to say something?
Oh, man. I don't know. I'm just,
Thank you, Mark.
Another distinguishing feature is their paranoid tone. So in these films, everyone is a suspect. And in this clip from Urban Legend's Final Cut, we can see how that plays out. The lead character imagines that all of the main cast members are the masked killer, including herself.
He was a hell of a talent. I'm so surprised. But for the Hitchcock, he's gonna steal the Hitchcock from me.
Trip?
Fantasy.
I'm good at that.
I need to make the same face just as bad as I do.
Tragic.
I don't know.
Trust me. Paranoia.
I know about you.
What's been going
Fear
on?
of imprisonment. Not exactly what we expect.
Nice horror script.
Wrong man accused. Especially you, little girl.
My brother didn't kill himself.
Goodbye. Don't tell anybody you saw me here.
I should trust you.
Trust me.
Yet another indicator of the tone is the tendency for the filmmaker to play games with the audience. So in this clip from the climax of Scream 2, one killer tells Sidney that he has a partner.
Told you I had a partner, Sid. Surprise cameo just for you.
And then Gail, played by Courtney Cox, is presented for just long enough that we can declare, "Ah, I knew it," before the second killer actually enters the scene.
Mrs. Loomis? What?
Billy's mother! Nice twist, huh? Didn't see it coming, did you?
So the tone's underhanded. It goads the viewer into guessing the killer's identity and then presents it as a kind of gotcha. And even worse, the audience couldn't really have reasonably guessed who the second killer was because vital information about their identity is withheld from us. So here is the fact that the killer is a mother who's taking revenge, but we're only told that after the fact. This pattern is typical of the era. Everyone's presented as a suspect and the filmmakers openly goad the viewer into guessing who the killer is, but also makes it clear that any guess could be a double bluff. So, for example, in I've Been Waiting for You, Sarah and Charlie try to work out the killer's identity.
Well, I think we should face it. I mean, if any of us has a motive for picking off those guys, it's me. Well, think about it. I mean, those guys beat me up every single week in grade school. And they put snakes in my backpack and ants in my gym shorts. I'm the obvious choice.
Which makes you definitely not the killer.
Chet, that makes me the most obvious choice again. Because I'm the least obvious choice, because I'm the most obvious choice. Well, you know what I mean.
As it turns out in this case, Charlie actually is the killer. He more or less admits that in this sequence. But the audience is left, because of what he says, guessing without knowing whether what he says is a bluff or whether he's telling the truth. Now, if we combine that with what we've already said about the history of the slasher, then we come to see it in a different light. The slasher burnt out because it became repetitive, and it tried to diversify and burned out again, and then became a kind of joke version of its former self. So across the 80s, we have a move from this...
Please, God.
This is God.
To this.
Why do I wear the razor-sharp glove? It should be obvious by now. I have a clause in my contract.
So postmodern slashers keep some of that jokiness, but it keeps it as ironic snark that's coloured by the cynical, paranoid tone of the stories. So postmodern slasher films end up being jokily non-committal, smugly saying, we've seen this all before, and actually being quite dismissive about the slasher and its conventions. We can see that in Scream, where Sidney criticises the slasher film.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Moments later, Sidney then runs up the stairs when she should be running out the front door. In other words, these films tell us what is going to happen while rolling their eyes about how hokey conventions are, but then they still give us the conventions anyway. So these films can come across as self-defeating in that sense. At worst, these postmodern slasher films start to focus inward on themselves in a way that starts to look quite self-destructive. Take this example of Jason X, for instance. The film is set in the future, and Jason here is cryogenically frozen for centuries, and then he's reanimated on a spacecraft. And at this stage, in the climax, the crew are trying to trick Jason for long enough that they can escape from him. And they do that by using a virtual reality simulation to replicate the 1980s campground he's used to, complete with avatars of camp counselors that are there for him to murder.
It's working! He's buying it! Whoops.
What do you mean, whoops?
Nothing.
Not nothing. You don't just say oops. What oops?
I think he saw me.
If you've got something brilliant up your sleeve, now's the time to do it.
I got something. Repair variations using data file Crystal Lake 1980. Okay?
Here goes nothing.
Initiate.
Hey, you want a beer?
Or do you want to smoke some pot?
Or we can have premarital sex.
We love premarital sex.
Their dialogue is an equivalent of Randy in Scream, proclaiming that
there are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
As I'm sure is obvious, the joke in Jason X is that these camp counselors are too flagrant about violating the conventional rules, especially in front of Jason. But these avatars are superficial caricatures that exaggerate the Friday the 13th series traits. The scene reduces the series and its characters to a one-dimensional joke. And given that it's set in virtual reality, I mean it literally, that it's a depthless and superficial rendering of the slasher's past. Jason X also apologises for itself throughout. When talking about why Jason was frozen in stasis in the first place, the lead protagonist, Rowan, says,
"But unfortunately, some people who were too smart for their own good Felt that a creature that couldn't be killed was simply too valuable to just file away. In the end, it always comes down to money.
So here the character seems to apologise to Jason X's audience, implying that the executives at New Line Cinema brought Jason back for a quick buck, even though they really shouldn't have.
I think you should just get rid of him, Professor. He's too dangerous.
Well, that would be irresponsible and foolhardy. He's a valuable scientific artifact that must be carefully preserved.
These films are quite nihilistic. In this universe, even the Earth has been milked dry, just like the Friday the 13th series, and has also been replaced by a sequel.
I brought you something to eat. Not much longer and we'll be at Earth 2.
Earth 2? What happened to Earth 1?
It's dead. The oceans, the soil, neither will sustain life.
This tone's exactly what the meta-modern slasher films are reacting against. So instead of being cynical, flippant, callous, apathetic and defeatist, meta-modern slasher films are interested in innovation and sincerity. That isn't to say that these films are always humourless, because often their sincere messages are presented through ironic humour. That might sound odd at first, but is an approach we find more generally in the zeitgeist. So consider memes, for example. Memes frequently use irony and humour to express sincere emotional states and political opinions. So although we might laugh when someone uses this meme on social media, for instance, it's usually used to express something that is serious or that something that the meme user really does care about. Here a meme can be a source of laughter, but it can also convey genuine fear or anger. That mode's what I mean by metamodern. So metamodernism refers to a turn away from the snarky cynicism of postmodernism towards sincere expression and a desire to inspire change, even in the face of what seems like overwhelming crisis. Another analogy might help to describe the difference in tone. So the postmodern slasher reuses conventional elements from older slasher films, and it's upfront about the fact that it's reusing those older elements. It's like buying something made out of recycled materials. The problem with recycling is that each time the materials are recycled, they degrade, so you can't keep recycling the same plastic forever. Metamodernism instead is a bit more like upcycling. You take an existing item and you combine it with other elements to create something new and surprising. So what does the metamodern slasher film look like? It's probably easiest to demonstrate that by using some examples. Axe Murdering with Hackley is an example that upcycles rather than recycles. So rather than pointing out conventions and then playing out those same conventions in a pretty much standard way like Scream does, Hackley introduces a new unusual context that provides a reason to point out the conventions and to critique them. So Axe Murdering with Hackley is set in an office, treating slashers as white-collar workers. And here the title character is a veteran slasher who's struggling with change. So after he's unable to meet his quarterly kill quota targets, Hackley's put on a performance improvement plan.
Obviously, I'm not very happy with your performance. We are going to have to put you on a performance improvement plan.
What? No. I've been here 30 years. All right, I'm in our company commercial. A pimp? Me?
You're not getting fired. We're not mad at you. We just want to help get you back on track.
This situation's used to examine the subgenre's rules. So here Hackley refers to the subgenre's rules as corporate bureaucracy that gets in the way of his ability to get on with the job, murdering.
I hate my job. Now, don't get me wrong. I love what I do. I hate my bosses, my cubicle, and what's worse, the mountains of red tape I gotta go through. We are just bogged down with status report after status report. And then in between the status reports, we gotta have a status meeting.
In one of the first scenes, we see exactly what he's complaining about. So a mock trailer shows Hackley in his heyday, where he's presented as an intimidating villain.
Don't be scared. Don't be frightened. Be completely terrified. Hackley's reign of terror will never end. There's just no stopping Hackley.
Then we cut to the present and his situation on the job, which paints a very different picture.
Is he still back there? Yep. Okay. I want to get a selfie.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. And oh, there he is.
Stop. Switch. Come on.
Fine. Can we please stop?
Look, just don't take your eyes off of him and we'll be fine.
How long have we been at this now?
13 fucking hours.
The problem here is that the smug teens now know the rules that Hackley has to follow, and that prevents him from doing his job properly. So Axe Murdering with Hackley uses that comic setup to consider the slasher subgenre's continuing relevance, especially after Scream, because Scream pinned down the rules, showing that Scream's teens understand how the conventions now work, and Scream also told anyone who didn't know the rules exactly how the slasher film now works. So in Axe Murdering with Hackley, the stalked teens know exactly how to use the rules now against the killers, and the killers are now incapacitated by those rules.
Have you even been in the field for 20 years? I mean, no, you don't even know what it's like out there, man. These rules, they don't work anymore. Nobody can kill effectively with this kind of limitation.
So Axe Murdering with Hackley is really about the current state of the subgenre. And even though Hackley is meant to represent an old school slasher, particularly Jason Voorhees, it's not that Axe Murdering with Hackley is nostalgic in that it wants to return to the 1980s. Hackley complains that he used to be able to kill without worrying about the rules.
I remember a day when if you just wanted to kill somebody, I mean, you didn't even need a reason. If they could have tripped and fallen and you could have cut their head off before they hit the ground, it was a different time.
That last sentence is vital. Hackley doesn't just want the past back again. Hackley is also critical of the 1980s. And in this scene, Hackley refers to some of those outdated conventions that define the 1980s slasher.
I am very disappointed in you. You didn't kill the black guy first.
What?
I'm talking with Rival right now. I don't want to hear that any of you let the black guy live any longer than necessary, okay? Okay, now we're on to Employee of the Month.
No, hold on here now. Look, of all of the backwards and stupid rules, I cannot believe that you were going to promote this one.
It's been around for years. What's it to you?
I'm black, you idiot!
Really?
When Hackley fights to keep his job then, he might miss how things were, but he doesn't just want to recycle the past. More than anything, Hackley wants things to be better than they currently are. He wants to innovate. He wants to move forward.
Yeah, okay, look, I know the drill, but I don't like the way we're doing things. I have to spend all this time casing the joint. We could just kill her. Can you imagine how ballsy that would look? Not even worrying about it, whether or not she's a good girl. We just kill her. She's a good girl, you know what I'm saying? And think about the headline, man. It would be like, look, anyone could be a victim.
No. Hackley, that's dumb. We can't go off company handbook. We have these things for a reason.
Axe Murdering with Hackley's view of the subgenre's past is very different to the kind of view we get in something like Scream. In the postmodern slasher, older slashers are called classics, and that seems to suggest that they belong to a bygone era. And that helps to distinguish the postmodern slasher as new or smarter and savvier in comparison to those older slashers. Here, Hackley is the embodiment of the old school slasher, but he's also the most astute and aware character. He's also the only one who wants to move forward. He points out that sticking to the conventions has stifled innovation, and that critique of the subgenre is much smarter than simply pointing out the rules and then reiterating them like Scream does. The postmodern slashers use snarky comedy to point out how hokey older slashers are, but they don't really offer any solutions to make the subgenre better. Axe Murdering with Hackley uses irony to convey a sincere message about the subgenre, but the film also proves that innovation is possible by upcycling, by adding something new rather than just repeating. Here's a second example. If you haven't seen Triangle before, I'm sorry I'm about to spoil the plot, and I'd suggest pausing and watching the film and then coming back here, because I really love the film and I recommend seeing it without knowing anything about the plot if you can. Rather than using a new setting, like Hackley does, Triangle uses an unusual narrative structure. Here's the time loop, so Triangle got there before Happy Death Day did. Triangle follows Jess. Jess meets her love interest Greg and his friends for a trip on Greg's yacht. When a storm capsizes the yacht, the group come across a seemingly abandoned ship. After boarding the ship, they're attacked by a masked killer. Jess survives, pushing the killer overboard, but before she does, the killer warns her.
What are you saying? It's the only way to get home. What? You have to kill them. Kill them! Kill them! Kill them!
Moments later, Jess sees Greg and his friends, including Jess, on the same upturned yacht she was previously on. And that group board the ship, and the first loop's events start again. This time, Jess changes the events, delaying some of the deaths. However, the entire group still eventually die. The loop starts over again. Desperate to get back to her autistic son, Tommy, this time Jess puts on the mask, trying to replicate the first loop. Because she's now the masked killer, Jess is pushed overboard by another version of herself.
They'll return. Who are you? They'll return. You have to kill them. It's the only way to get home. What the fuck are you saying? It's the only way to save our son. You have to kill them. Kill them! Kill them! Ah!
She then washes ashore and runs home, and that's when she sees herself in the past, getting ready for a trip with Greg, getting frustrated with and hitting her son Tommy.
I'm sick of telling you this, Tommy. I ain't buying you any more toys if you can't look after the ones you've got. Now what? Oh, I'll just clean it off, shall I?
Our version of Jess then kills the past abusive version of herself, puts the body in the car, and tries to drive away with Tommy. When she's distracted by Tommy's crying,
There, it's gone. See? There.
she crashes the car, leaving Tommy dead.
No point trying to save the boy. There's nothing anyone can do that's going to bring him back.
Jess understands that she only has one option if she wants to change what's happened.
Can I give you a ride?
Yes. Take me to the harbor.
The film then ends, as it began, with Jess meeting Greg's friends and reboarding the yacht.
So let's go sailing.
And the postmodern slasher film typically involves snarkily pointing out conventional character types and structures, and then using those character types and structures anyway. That repetition suggests that filmmakers are doomed to recycle conventions because no innovation is possible. That idea of being doomed to repeat doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from the slasher film's history of production cycles. So as we said earlier, the first boom period of slasher film production developed rapidly, the market was quickly saturated, and the subgenre burnt itself out. The conventions were established, and then they were repeated so often that audiences effectively got bored. Then the slasher film entered into a supernatural phase, and again the market became saturated, ideas were repeated, and audiences got bored. During the 80s, critics also continually said that the slasher film was one-dimensional, derivative, and repetitious. The postmodern slasher then just seems to accept that the slasher film is doomed to repeat itself and is doomed to burn out, and that no new original ideas are possible within the subgenre. So the postmodern slasher folds then back in on itself, joking about its own conventions and repeating them anyway. Like Hackley's office setting, Triangle's time loop structure offers a commentary on the slasher film and its repeated patterns. But it's not as simple as saying that Jess is doomed to repeat the same loops again and again, like slasher filmmakers are doomed to repeat the same old conventions again and again. It might be that the slasher film has a straightforward set of conventions, but that doesn't mean that the subgenre is one-dimensional, derivative, and repetitious. Instead, I'd put it that the slasher conventions are robust and instantly recognizable. That means filmmakers can make changes to the conventions and the film will still remain recognisable as a slasher movie. Also, audiences will tolerate experiments with convention. In the metamodern slasher, conventions aren't traps, they're opportunities. And to see how Triangle gives us that message, we need to know more about how Jess is presented. So before, we said that in the postmodern slasher, murder mystery structures are often used to trick the viewer because vital information is withheld, or there are so many double bluffs that we can't really trust our own guesses. Triangle takes a different approach. The killer is unmasked halfway through.
It's me, Jess.
Even before that, we're given reason to suspect that something is wrong with Jess. So when she goes to the harbour, the boat hand Victor suggests that he isn't sure about Jess.
Jess, you okay? I don't think so.
When they board the ship, Jess has deja vu, suggesting that we'll eventually find out something about her relationship with that ship.
You all right?
I feel like I know this place. I recognize this corridor.
So it isn't that the filmmakers are trying to trick us here. If there is anything that actually is surprising about Jess being the killer, it's that she's introduced to us in a different role. So she's first introduced to us as the survivor or the final girl. But again, that isn't a trick. It isn't that she was the killer all along and she was just pretending to be good or something. She is both the killer and the survivor at the same time, and that's because she's going around in the loops. So that structure means she's literally battling against herself. And by the end, we realise that Jess is also battling against herself in a metaphorical way. She regrets hurting her son, and that's why she's continually willing to do anything to get off the ship and to get back to him. When she does get back to Tommy, she crashes the car and kills him and then returns to the start of the loop again. But that doesn't mean she's just doomed to repeat the same mistakes. The reason she returns to the harbour is because she believes that the next time she enters the loop, she can change what happened.
Victor, this didn't happen before. Don't you see?
Come on.
You see, the boat comes back when you're all dead. I've done everything exactly like before, but when the boat comes back, I'll be ready. I'll be waiting. I'll be on the landing bay. I won't let any of them board, even the other me. I'll make them all stay on the upturned yacht.
Don't be scared, Victor. I can save you. I know how to save you.
Triangle is a story about hope for change for the future, even though things look fated to repeat. As a reflection on the subgenre, the loops evoke the ways that the subgenre seems to be doomed to repeat the same old ideas and conventions again and again. But Triangle itself proves that more can be done to experiment with and change the slasher subgenre in the future. The time loop structure itself is unconventional, but that Jess is both the killer and survivor is also a way of playing with conventional character types. Let's take one final example. Getting Schooled is a slasher film set in a school in 1983. Like Jason X, Getting Schooled presents the past through cliches. The plot combines several ideas that were common in 1980s cinema. Its main influence is the archetypal 80s teen film The Breakfast Club, which brings together different teen character types.
A brain, a beauty, a jock, a rebel, and a recluse.
Getting Schooled uses the same Saturday detention and the same character types, but adds a slasher. The slasher doesn't feel out of place because so many slasher films were already set in schools, including Final Exam, Graduation Day, and Massacre at Central High. These films also tended to feature the same kinds of teen character types we find in The Breakfast Club. Also, Getting Schooled's killer is a traumatized Vietnam veteran turned teacher who ends up snapping.
Julie! Hear that? It's the sound of nothing. No choppers coming for you. In my jungle.
Again, that's a common type we find in 80s cinema. Following The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, and First Blood, the Vietnam film resurged in the mid to late 80s, where we had Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Good Morning Vietnam, Jackknife, and so forth. And again, the combination of slasher film and the Vietnam theme is quite natural. Some slasher-adjacent films like Scum of the Earth and Don't Answer the Phone had traumatized Vietnam veteran killers, and the Final Terror's Survival in the Forest horror is a bit like Friday the 13th meets First Blood. So far, it might sound like Getting Schooled is more like a postmodern slasher film because it's recycling material from the past. But in the postmodern slasher film, those past elements are superficial symbols. So, for example, classic film titles are referred to, but that doesn't really shape the plot. Postmodern slashers are mainly concerned with the present. From the perspective of the mid-90s, the 80s slashers look dated because the music, haircuts and slang fell out of fashion quickly. The postmodern slashers aren't nostalgic for the past because the past is hokey and outdated. The 80s films aged quickly, so the 90s postmodern slashers updated the fashion and attitudes to sell the same recycled slasher conventions to a new generation of teen viewers. At the same time, the postmodern slasher filmmakers seem aware that their films will age quickly as well. That knowledge feeds the postmodern slasher's cynical, nihilistic tone. The metamodern slasher film takes a different view. We can recognise that the past through symbols such as popular fashions and musical styles of an era, but the past can still be valuable. Rather than separating the past from the present, as the postmodern slasher films do, the metamodern slashers bring the past and the present together to help us to learn about the present. So Getting Schooled is set in 1983, but it isn't trying to be the past. It uses conventional stereotypes and then builds on them. So, for example, Getting Schooled uses the same character types as The Breakfast Club, but then it subverts those types. So to illustrate what I mean, here Rusty, the bad boy, compares himself to Shelley, the nerd.
I could be like you. If I wanted to.
Yeah, right.
What'd you score on your SATs?
1420.
It's pretty good.
Yes, so why don't you humor us?
1500.
Bullshit.
No way. No way. Let me see that shit. Fucking A, dude.
This reveal reverses the usual assumptions we might have about the bad boy type, but it also unsettles the nerd type, who is usually defined by being the smartest person in the room. In The Breakfast Club, the teens talk with each other, but they don't actually learn much about each other. They certainly don't learn anything that changes the stereotypes. They just learn to get along in spite of their differences. The types remain uninterrupted. So, in this sequence from The Breakfast Club, Claire reveals one of her hidden talents.
I want to see what Claire can do.
Can't do anything.
Now, everybody can do something.
There's one thing I can do. No, forget it. It's way too embarrassing.
You ever seen Wild Kingdom? I mean, that guy's been doing that show for 30 years.
Okay. You have to swear to God you won't laugh. Okay. Can't believe I'm actually doing this.
All right. That's great.
Getting Schooled has a completely different approach. Claire's equivalent in Getting Schooled is Hillary, but her hidden talent is much more impressive.
Look, we all have skills. We need to use them. You are smart. He's strong. Hillary is... well...
Hillary is a gymnast, captain of the cheer squad, and a black belt in Taekwondo.
Like Rusty's intelligence, the reveal of Hillary's martial arts skills challenges the stereotype. So Getting Schooled sets up conventions but clearly wants to move beyond them. Where this becomes even more clearly meta-modern is in the film's approach to emotional realism and sincerity. So in Getting Schooled, when a teen dies, it matters to the other teens. They mourn for each other. So when Hillary dies, bad boy Rusty again goes against his character type, crying and hugging her body. The sentimental score in this sequence suggests that it's meant to be sincere.
Oh, no.
This type of grief is unusual in the slasher film. So in the 1980s slasher films, teens didn't usually know about their peers' deaths until they themselves were being chased by the killer, so there wasn't usually much time to grieve. Critics commonly proposed that the slasher film teens were just one-dimensional stereotypes, that they were doomed to die and so they weren't worth caring about anyway. Many critics even put it that the slasher film's teens were annoying and suggested that the audiences wanted those characters to die. That attitude's reflected in the postmodern slasher where, as we saw earlier, the teens smirk about each other's deaths because nothing really matters and nothing is treated with any sincerity. Getting Schooled's clearly doing something very different. Whenever a teenager dies in this film, the survivors group together and mourn.
He saved my life.
And lost his.
This collective grieving is also important. The postmodern slasher necessarily separates its characters. The characters need to be separate and paranoid because everyone is a suspect. Getting Schooled emphasises collaboration and togetherness instead, and these threads come together when Julie mourns for Hillary. And here she talks about judging Hillary as a superficial archetype, but instead wishing that they'd bonded and got to know each other properly.
You know, earlier when she was saying that she wanted to be out shopping for her prom dress, I thought, how typical. Princess wants to go shopping for a prom dress. Why do we do that? Why do we have these misconceived ideas of one another? If this wouldn't have happened, then we wouldn't be talking like this. I don't want to be like that anymore.
Getting Schooled sets up worn-out stereotypes and then adds elements to show that there's more to those types than first meets the eye. It then emphasises emotion and sincerity to rewrite history, overwriting the critic's suggestion that 80s teens were annoying and one-dimensional, and also the callous attitudes and separation that we get in the postmodern slasher. A low-budget slasher film like Getting Schooled would be easy to dismiss, but there's more to it than there first seems to be. The same is true of the slasher subgenre as a whole. There's more going on in the subgenre from the mid-2000s onwards than just remakes or just slasher throwbacks. Most importantly, metamodern slashers reflect a broader cultural shift from cynicism and apathy in the face of crisis towards a sincere belief that change is not only necessary, but is also possible.